like, "You have very pretty eyes." And if she responds in a way that says, oh, you really think so? They know that she's vulnerable, that she could be coerced, convinced. She could be one that they could get. And the psychological games, they're master manipulators, and they understand the human psyche, and especially young people, very, very well. Those who are out to just pick children up. We had a situation on the west side of the state this last winter, and it never made the papers. You probably may remember in Northport back in April, Jessica Heeringa disappeared from the Exxon gas station as she was closing up. Ironically, when we had our press conference in Grand Rapids to announce this package of bills, that was the very day that the law enforcement in that area decided they would no longer keep the group together, the task force that was looking into her disappearance, and they disbanded it. They're not giving up the search, obviously, but the group that was focusing on that is no longer in existence. So it is one of those things that makes me wonder if she wasn't trafficked. But prior to that, earlier, probably around March or February, a friend of mine was over there on the west side, and it wasn't that far from Norton Shores. I said Northport earlier, it was Norton Shores. And she and her dad, young girl, probably 14, she and her dad had stopped at a Subway to get sandwiches to take home. And it was dark, it was March, February, and a snowstorm, big snowstorm in the area at that point in time. And she went in and they ordered their sandwiches, and they noticed when they went in that there was a car idling, and there was a guy loitering against the building in the middle of a snowstorm, which is odd. So they went in and were in there for a while, and when they came out, the young girl was ahead of her dad. He was still paying. She came out and she went around the corner where their car was parked and noticed the guy still loitering beside the building. And the car is there with the engine running, idling, and a driver. And she went on over to where their car was parked. And as she passed, the loiterer stepped out behind her. And little did they know that her dad was coming out the door and coming around the corner at that point in time. When the guy in the car recognized there was a father figure involved, he takes off with the car, and the loiterer wonders where his getaway car has gone. And fortunately for this family, nothing unforeseen occurred, and they went home. And they didn't really think about it. They really didn't analyze it until they sat down and they started eating and they started talking about it. And they realized it was probably a setup. It was probably in place for just the type of thing that we're talking about tonight. So I guess my point to all that is it's anywhere, it's everywhere, and the victims can be your sisters, your daughters, your granddaughters, your neighbor, your godchild, and it's not just girls, it's young men, and that is growing as well. And we need your help to address this issue. It's one thing to believe that it is a heinous act, but it's another thing to get involved and acknowledge that you can do something. And one of the things you can do is help us with our legislation, help us get the word out to folks that we are working, and we're working very hard on this. And the fact that I see you have the human trafficking hotline up, that's very important. It is a national hotline, and traffickers go all across the country. And to a person, the survivors that we talk with are telling us that anyone that they talk with and that they work with and in rehabilitation, every one of them tells them that they have come through Detroit at one time or another. And that's pretty significant. We do have cards that we will not share your email address, but if you want to be notified about what's going on or events or when the legislation will be heard, we will let you know, and we'll put you on our only on our trafficking list. We don't want to confuse you with other information. We don't want to inundate you. But it's one of those things that I've never worked on an issue in the legislature where I have seen people as committed as they are to this in the state of Michigan. The folks that are concerned about this really, really will not stop until we do something that's very, very significant and very meaningful for the victims. You know, people ask us, what can we do? And I like to give the example of a trucker. There is a specific group out there, and they're based in Colorado, Truckers Against Trafficking. And they're being very, very effective. And a situation not that long ago, about a year and a half ago, in Toledo, in that area, one of the guys in the truck stop noticed, just noticed there was activity going on. It didn't seem right, and he had done a little reading, done a little research on trafficking, and so he actually called the trafficking hotline and reported it, and they then funneled it to law enforcement. And by that one phone call, he was able to break up a multi-state trafficking ring and save, oh my goodness, multiple victims, and get them out of a situation where they had no hope until somebody, just trusting their gut instinct, made the phone call. And sometimes that's all it takes. Did anybody see the news a few days ago on the pornographic ring that was broken up in Canada? Hundreds of victims, hundreds of perpetrators, and you have to give all the credit in the world to law enforcement because they pursued that doggedly, and it goes back many years when they first became aware. But that's the kind of thing that keeps all of us working on this issue, keeps us moving forward, because we know that it is that one incident, just that one time that you didn't turn your head, that you didn't think, well, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm not noticing something that I think I see. And we're just grateful that people are willing to get involved. You are right about the cost. The cost is the driver on this. 5 or 6 girls can create an income of $500,000 a year for an individual. There was a case in southeast Michigan, not too far from the suburbs, actually in the suburbs. This individual was a coach of some kind, soccer, I don't know what it was, but he was a coach. He had children, he had a job, he had a wife, a family, and down the street a few blocks, he also had a house set up where he was trafficking women. And he was making some pretty good money doing that. It's a driver. The economy, just the greed, I guess you would say, is a big driver on this. And when you hear the term almost $32 billion every year, they estimate that across the globe, it's $87 million a day that's generated and running through an underground economy. So not only we are going to be dealing with survivors and their needs, but we are also recognizing that we're not generating anything off from the folks trafficking to meet those needs. So a piece of legislation that also will be offered up is asset forfeiture. When you get to the trafficker and you go after their assets and turn that then into resources to help address the individuals who have been trafficked. And it doesn't affect just them, it affects their families, it affects anybody who's involved with them. The most diabolical thing I think we've learned in our research is the fact that not only is an individual trafficked, but once they become too old, too useless, too health-wise not able to continue in this, the traffickers will harvest their organs. They will take their babies and they will sell them. And that is why the average age, the length of time that you manage to live once you're trafficked, is about 7 years. So time is of the essence. We know that there are individuals out there that are relying on us. And I'm just grateful that you're willing to be here and be involved and learn more and just have a heart for those individuals where they're just looking for someone to talk for them, to speak for them, while they can't speak for themselves. At this point, we want to be their voice and give them more. So I will stop. I know you have questions. I know you're on somewhat of a schedule here, but I don't want to go too long. Let me take my things out of the way. All right.
On your website, Senator, it did say that Michigan was more susceptible because of our waterways. Can you comment on that?
Well, simply because our waterways abut, at least on one side of the state, to an international border. And international borders are frequently used. We understand that there are 5 cities in Michigan that are the most prevalent and have the most traffic, according to what we know. And that's the other piece. It's hard to get hard data on this particular issue simply because there's so little available. But Port Huron, simply because it's the bridge, and the water, the access to Canada. Port Huron, Detroit, Grand Rapids, believe it or not, Mackinac Island, and Flint. Those are the most visible that we know cities that have the most visibility as far as trafficking. So anybody in this state, if you can land anywhere in this state, you can pretty well get somebody out of here within an hour, at least an hour and a half, because you're so close to a border in every direction, really, even from the middle of the state.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize all the questions. Do we have more? Good, thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for being here. My name is Jody Liebman. And I would like to ask you, what is the biggest difference between your legislation and Attorney General Bill Schuette's?
Well, they're all working, it's all been a simpatico effort. Their subcommittee has legislation as well, and honestly, they're all going to mesh together when we're all done. So not really any differences, really. We just might be focusing on something different than what they're focusing on yet.
The decriminalization aspect of it?
That is part of it as well. Specifically when you've been coerced into committing a crime where, perhaps burglary, thievery, anything like that, we're looking to decriminalize that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can address that quickly, that's one of the big stumbling blocks for identifying is the criminalization at this point. There's quite a bit of anecdotal evidence about people who have been trafficked, who have been arrested time and time again before they're even adults for prostitution. One of the big things about Attorney General Schuette's legislation is it won't allow, the example that I can give is a 13-year-old girl to be arrested for prostitution. She shouldn't be. She can't even consent to sex in Michigan. How can she be arrested for prostitution? That would help us, because then they don't have that fear that they're going to be arrested if they tell us, this is why I'm doing this. I guess the best description is to give them an incentive to come forward to us, to give us the opportunity to help them. Right now, they're afraid that if they tell a police officer, I'm a prostitute, because if I don't, they're going to kill my mother, then they think they're just going to go to jail for being a prostitute. So they don't tell us that. They're willing to take the fall for that case. So I think it's a huge, huge bonus, the decriminalization. I think that's probably one of the best parts of the legislation that I've heard from a law enforcement standpoint.
Thanks to both of you for being here. And you just addressed a question that I had about understanding what the political climate was around the package of legislation. So you say that generally things are working well and you've got a lot of cohesiveness.
We do have a lot of cohesiveness, but I will tell you that there are always going to be issues where people will quibble over wording, such as may versus shall, and really some real small verbiage issues. But conceptually, pretty much folks are in favor of this, but I have to say that with a caveat. As we introduce the legislation, an individual